Hi everyone, it's Roger here from What's On at DisneyPlus.com. It's Monday, it's time for a quick Disney Plus news roundup. We're going to be talking about some of the big box office duds of 2022. We'll also be talking about Bob Iger's comments about making less shows, but making better shows, and much more. But before we go any further, make sure you subscribe here on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook and audio platforms, and you'll keep up with the latest Disney Plus news, so let's jump into it. So Disney obviously released a lot of films, and 2022 was a bit of an odd year, with some films being massive successes like Avatar: The Way of Water, and other films like Lightyear and also Strange World becoming basically the biggest failures of the year. Now, Deadline has put out some stats. I'm going through some of the biggest flops of 2022, and 3 Disney films were on that list. We had Amsterdam, Strange World, and Lightyear. I kind of want to just get into some of the details of that, of how they lost the money and kind of what went wrong with them. Now, I definitely feel like all 3 films, they were all fine. I'll start off with Amsterdam. Thought it was an okay film. It wasn't amazing, but generally you can see why it had such a huge cast, a lot of money being spent on that. There was also issues with Amsterdam where filming got shifted to Los Angeles due to the pandemic, which apparently boosted the price of the making of the film by about $30 million, which obviously had an impact. But also, and I think this is something that seems to be kept getting lost about 2022, is we were still in the pandemic era. We were still having problems with cinemas being closed, mask mandates and stuff like that in some countries. Globally, everything wasn't back to normal. In some countries have only recently gone back. So I think sometimes, people are looking back on it and like what it's like now rather than what it was like back then. Why like Turning Red was sent to streaming rather than to cinemas was because at the time, there was worries about, different versions of the virus and all kinds of stuff. So it's very much, and as the year went on, so the box office got a little bit better, and as we've gone through this year, we've kind of seen the same thing. But I do think that is important to note that that is one issue. I feel like with Amsterdam, it was a film that just didn't hit right. The story was all over the place. I watched it when it arrived on Disney Plus here in the UK. It was okay. I didn't think it was anything amazing, but I skipped it at the cinema because it just didn't appeal. And that's probably what a lot of us have been doing and why they're going back to kind of trying to retrain us to stop doing that. Either go see it at the cinema, go watch it on digital, buy the DVD, and then get it on streaming. That's why we're seeing this shift back to it, kind of get us out of it. Because I know I did it on so many films last year where it's just like, I just don't need to go see it at the cinema, I'll just wait. So Amsterdam lost a lot of money. It just didn't get a lot of attention, and I'm not surprised because it was a little bit of a messy film in terms of what it was about. And so that was Amsterdam. So we can kind of, ultimately with these kind of films, it's always a bit of a roll of a dice sometimes of whether or not they're going to work or not. But Disney did have some major problems with Lightyear and also Strange World. And ironically, kind of in some ways, some of the same problems actually impacted both films. They was very, very similar in terms of some of the issues they faced. First off, Disney has really struggled with science fiction. It's, and then you think of the amount of times it's tried to do science fiction films, and we're not gonna put Star Wars in this category. We're gonna do something different. When you look at Atlantis, you also had Treasure Planet. You also had the John Carter movie, which I think was kind of underrated, but was a massive loss for the company. Disney has had struggles trying to get sci-fi out to a bigger audience. There was also a big feedback to both films about them having gay characters. And now they were very small characters, didn't really make a lot of impact on the story, and it did seem to get massively overblown of what importance those characters had and the impact that it was had. But it did have a negative impact on the box office numbers and the perception around those films. There's also the whole element of climate change and people kind of going on about, they want to be entertained and they don't want politics. Well, all stories are based on some kind of idea or politics, unless it's a Super Mario movie. Because it's just about Super Mario running around hitting blocks. But nevertheless, and I think that is obviously one of the key things. Strange World was an okay movie. It wasn't anything amazing. It wasn't anything particularly groundbreaking, and it didn't kind of pull audiences in. It just didn't attract people. I keep seeing people mention about the fact that Strange World they didn't see any advertising. Well, no, they were advertising it. They were putting out the trailers. They were putting out the bits and pieces. They spent like $90 million advertising it. The simple thing is, it was so generic, it just went right through people and people didn't notice. So that was the problem with Strange World. It was just a generic thing. No one really knew what the film was about beforehand. Disney kind of rushed it through onto Disney Plus for Christmas, and for trying to kind of, in some way, maybe do what they did with Encanto, but it didn't work the same way, because the movie just didn't have those elements. It didn't have the music, it didn't have the feels, and it was just very average. And unfortunately, average just doesn't pull people in after the pandemic when people weren't going. Lightyear, again, I thought it was a really fun movie. I actually really enjoyed it, but the simple thing is, it wasn't Buzz Lightyear. It wasn't the Buzz Lightyear we've seen in Toy Story. People got confused. People didn't understand what it was. But both of those movies kind of lost their way. You know, they kind of got picked up for the idea that there was something in there that there probably really wasn't. They were just generally considered to be average movies. And people expect more from that, you know. Especially like with Pixar. People wanted to get people going back to the cinema because after like Luca and Turning Red and Soul, which were all really great movies, but they weren't released in cinemas. Onward, you know, before that there was another Disney film that got released, didn't have much chance to get a good box office hit, so you had the same thing with Raya. Those few years of the pandemic, essentially we're going to have an asterisk next to them because there was reasons why they didn't able to pull in the audience. Going forward, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Elemental this summer. You know, with and like Wish. I mean, that looks like that's going to be a lot of fun of what we've seen of it so far. But this is ultimately the key problem with those films is they missed on multiple reasons. There, you can literally sit there and go, that was why that failed. That's why that's why that failed. And all studios have misses. You know, it's common. And, you know, they do have these kind of things. Some movies come along and do better. At the minute, Illumination and DreamWorks are hitting out the park. You know, with the Mario movie and the Minions movies and things like this, because they're making fun, easygoing films for kids to like that are much cheaper to make, because that's the key thing here. The budgets of both Lightyear and Strange World were much lower than we saw with those films, so therefore that's what, I mean, Strange World is actually, and Lightyear are both really, really, like, they're gorgeous. There's some really lovely artwork in there, and it is fantastic. But it all got mixed up in all the messaging and all the rest of it, and I feel like, you know, we're kind of going into 2023 now there's a lot of pressure on Elemental to hit, but also, you know, with these movies, it's they don't generally just make all their money just on the opening weekend or the first few weeks. You know, they make it over time through digital, then through Blu-ray sales, and then on with DVD, and then obviously Disney Plus. But merchandise is a key aspect as well of what is considered success. Strange World just didn't really have any of that. I don't know with Lightyear whether or not the merchandise kind of maybe was able to sell it. I'm not entirely sure it did. Lightyear was just a miss on so many different levels because it just wasn't what people were looking for from a Buzz Lightyear film. They wanted Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear, not the Chris Evans version that we got. It's a solid film, but it just didn't hit. And so, yes, it's very interesting to see how those films, they did all right on Disney Plus. They weren't particularly, you know, they're not like Encanto or Moana, but some of the, you know, you don't get those kind of big films all the time. So it will be interesting to see what moves forward. I definitely feel with these kind of films, they are going to have to do a little bit more to kind of just get everyone back in on board. But also, a lot of this as well is like retraining audiences not to wait for Disney Plus. So I expect Elemental is going to be one that's going to take a wilder drop onto Disney Plus after. One of the key things as well Disney is going to have to do is kind of retrain us to kind of go cinema to see them. I think if Elemental is really good, that is going to be a key thing to get people going back. But we're just going to have to wait and see how all of this comes together. But yeah, so there's just a lot of issues there with those films, but let me know what you think of this in the comments below. Recently, Disney CEO Bob Iger took part in an interview with Time where he was asked about a number of different topics. Now, one of the things that got brought up was about the future of Hulu, and it was a very generic answer, really. He went on to say, we own about 2/3 of Hulu and Comcast owns the other piece, and they actually have the right to put their piece to us. In other words, force us to buy them out. If they decide to do that, then we will have no choice but to buy them out. Now, I think he's being very open about this because I think in some ways he's having to set the expectations that, you know, Disney will probably have to buy out Hulu's stake if Comcast want to. Ultimately, this is the deal they put together, and also kind of putting it on the level for investors and stuff that, you know, this is gonna happen. So if suddenly they lose a lot of money one quarter, they can kind of go, look, we had to buy it. You know, this was a deal we made, and kind of set the tone that this is what they're expecting, and maybe as well just offset the idea. It was a very simple kind of response and not really giving too much away. But what was also interesting is he spoke about the idea of cutting back on content. He was asked about this. He went on to say, we want to continue to make programs that don't necessarily fit into one of our core brands, but we probably should make less of them. I think curation is a good thing because it probably forces more discipline on us in terms of quality. The more you make, typically you dilute quality, and we're looking to do the opposite. And when asked, do you mean fewer bigger things? He simply said, not necessarily bigger, just fewer and better. Ultimately, this is a problem for Disney because they are just creating so much content. They're making content on all different kind of networks. You know, you've got FX, you've got National Geographic, you've got Octave Collective, you've got Searchlight, you've got all these different platforms and channels. Whereas if they streamline things, they might need to be able to make a lot less and save a lot more money. I feel like in some ways you kind of wonder, like, what was the kind of point of them buying 20th Century Studios if they were going to just cut how much they're creating. But ultimately things have changed a lot since they brought it. But yeah, so we are going to see less but better stuff, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they make some fantastic shows, but do they need so many? We're going to have to wait and see, but let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. And then our question of the day, which is in reference to a video we did last week about does Disney Plus have a problem with National Geographic, Daniel asked, is this in any way related to the rumours that Disney plans to replace the National Geographic channels and magazine with Disney Nature and bury National Geographic as a brand? Or does anyone know if these rumours have any basis or credibility? Now, I'm going to be totally honest. I had never heard of this. I'd never heard of this rumour at all. And I think it makes complete no sense because National Geographic has been around for 100 plus years. It is extremely well known. It's extremely well, it's loved. It's got respected. I think it's more about the fact that Disney are just cutting back on some costs and reducing some of the content. They are 100% involved in making sure Nat Geo is a really strong, powerful brand. Disney Nature, that is more of like a kid's brand. Like, no, that's not really. I think all of this is just people putting two and two together and coming up with 76. There's no way that Disney are getting rid of National Geographic. It is a massive one, and also, you know, they've got the magazines and all the rest of it. Disney Nature, you know, I'm a subscriber to National Geographic, been so for years. It is not a Disney Nature book. The magazine is not a kids magazine. You know, there are kids versions, and they probably can do something a bit more interesting with that. But yeah, no, there's no way they're doing it. You know, it's good for Oscar stuff. It brings in a lot of money, and they also can do special like travel stuff with it. They just haven't really been able to utilize it yet. I think it'd be fantastic to use it like the Animal Kingdom. Yeah, the National Geographic is just way too a bigger brand and too well respected just to be turned into Disney Nature, which generally would be deemed as like a kid stuff, and that doesn't even have a brand. I think, yeah, so this is, I give this no credibility, and it's just kind of speculation. Yeah, I suspect the stuff of why they've been removing stuff from National Geographic on Disney Plus is because of costs, just trying to remove stuff that people aren't watching. Yeah, so I wouldn't give it any idea that this is real. Well, anyway, guys, that's the end of today's show. Make sure you go check us out over at whatsonatdisneyplus.com. Remember as well, give this video a like if you're here on YouTube or Facebook. It really does help. Also, subscribe to keep up with all the latest. You'll find that the versions of this on audio platforms as well, so you can subscribe there. And on that note, guys, thank you very much for watching. Big thank you to all our Patrons and YouTube channel members. And on that note, guys, thank you very much. See you guys soon. Laters.